My daughter-in-law lost her memory. My son was heartbroken. I wasn't. Because I knew that before the accident, she was planning to leave him and take all her money. Now I had a chance to fix everything. I hired an actor who introduced himself as her old friend and began telling her stories about how she'd always dreamed of opening an animal shelter and donating all her savings to it. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. Let's be honest, ladies, there comes a time when you think you've seen it all. You raise your kids, you maybe go back to work, you learn how to make a decent sourdough starter during a global pandemic. You think life's major surprises are tucked away in the rearview mirror. You settle in, you know? My big excitements were supposed to be watching my garden tomatoes ripen and maybe, if I was feeling frisky, booking a non-refundable cruise to Alaska. Then came Clarissa. My son, Michael, met her when he was 35. He's a good boy, always has been. A little soft around the edges, maybe. He trusts too easily, sees the good in everyone, a trait he thankfully gets from his late father, God rest his soul. Michael's an architect, and a good one. He designs beautiful, functional spaces. But he never quite learned how to design a life with strong enough walls to protect his own heart. Clarissa walked right through them like they were made of mist. She was dazzling. I'll give her that. The kind of woman who seems to glitter even in fluorescent lighting. She had that shiny shampoo commercial hair, teeth so white they looked like a special effect, and a laugh that could make a stone statue crack a smile. She was a wealth manager, which is one of those vague but impressive-sounding jobs that people have in the movies. She managed wealth all right. Her own mostly by acquiring other people's. I didn't like her from day one. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh, the classic mother-in-law, jealous of the younger woman who stole her baby boy. But it wasn't like that. Truly. I'd loved Michael's previous girlfriends. The sweet nurse from Omaha, the funny history teacher who could quote Monty Python. They were real people. Clarissa felt assembled. Like someone had put together a collage of what a perfect woman should be and forgot to add a soul. She would say all the right things, compliment my home, my cooking, but her eyes were always scanning, cataloging. I could almost hear the little ka-ching of a cash register behind her irises as she'd look at my antique silverware or the oil painting my husband bought me for our 20th anniversary. She talked about money constantly, but always in a sophisticated way. Investments, portfolios, market trends. She made my son feel worldly, and in return, he gave her access to his world. All of it. He put her name on his bank accounts. It just makes things easier, Mom. We're a team. He signed over the deed to the beautiful brownstone he'd painstakingly restored downtown. It's our house, Mom. It shows commitment. I bit my tongue so hard, I'm surprised I didn't sever it. My late husband had a saying, never give someone the keys to the castle until you're sure they're not planning a siege. Michael had handed Clarissa the keys, the deed, and the combination to the royal vault. The day I found out what she was really planning, my blood ran cold. It was a complete accident. I was meeting my friend Susan for lunch, and her daughter, a young paralegal, happened to join us. She was complaining about a particularly nasty divorce case she was working on. This woman is just incredible, she said, scrolling through her phone. She's got a secret escape fund her husband knows nothing about. She's been planning this for years, siphoning money, making it all look legit. Then she sighed and said, the things these wealth managers can do, this one, a Clarissa Vance, has everything so buttoned up our client's going to be left with practically nothing. The name hit me like a physical blow. Clarissa Vance. She hadn't taken Michael's last name. The air left my lungs. I must have gone pale because Susan asked if I was all right. I waved it off, pleading a sudden headache, but my mind was racing. I went home and did something I'm not proud of. Michael had left his laptop at my house, and I'd helped him set it up. The password was Frank the Tank 88, a silly tribute to his father. On a gut-wrenching hunch, I'd tried it on their shared cloud account. I got in, and there it was, a folder, password protected, named Spring Cleaning. It took me an hour to guess that password. Freedom 2.0. Inside was everything. Scanned bank statements from an account in her name only, filled with hundreds of thousands of dollars. Emails with a high-powered divorce attorney discussing the best time to serve Michael with papers, right after his big bonus was scheduled to land. A spreadsheet titled Asset Allocation that chillingly detailed every single thing of value Michael owned, with columns for market value and liquidation plan. She wasn't just planning to leave him, she was planning to gut him, to leave him with nothing but the shirt on his back and a mountain of debt from the second mortgage she'd convinced him to take out for a can't-miss investment opportunity, which I now saw was a shell company that funneled money directly to her secret account. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. I was paralyzed. How do you tell your beloved, soft-hearted son that the woman he adores, the woman he's building a life with, is a viper who sees him as nothing more than a temporary bank account? It would shatter him. He would probably hate me for telling him, accuse me of snooping, of trying to sabotage his happiness. I spent a week in a fog of rage and despair. I would bake bread with furious energy, kneading the dough as if it were Clarissa's smug face. And then, the universe intervened. The call came from Michael, hysterical. "Mom, it's Clarissa. There was an accident." A delivery truck had run a red light and T-boned her ridiculously expensive German sports car. She was alive, thank God for that, but she had a severe concussion. When she finally woke up in the hospital a day later, she looked at Michael, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion, and asked, "I'm sorry, who are you?" Retrograde amnesia, that's what the doctors called it. The last 5 years of her life? Gone. Poof. Everything from her 30th birthday to that very morning was a complete blank. She didn't remember Michael. She didn't remember their home. She didn't remember her job, her friends, or, as I confirmed with a tremor of dark satisfaction, her secret bank accounts and her meticulous plan for financial annihilation. Michael was devastated. He sat by her bedside, holding her hand, showing her pictures, trying to jog her memory. "See, darling, this was us in Tuscany. You loved that trip." She would just stare at the photos with the polite disinterest of a stranger. He saw a tragedy. I saw an opportunity. A terrible, wonderful, ethically questionable opportunity. It felt like a cosmic reset button had been pushed. All her evil little plans were still there, locked away in a mind that no longer had the key. The money was still sitting in that account, the attorney was still waiting for a call, but the puppet master was gone, replaced by a confused woman named Clarissa who just wanted to know if she liked coffee with or without sugar. I went into overdrive. I'm a retired high school principal. I know how to manage a project. I know how to handle difficult personalities and create a curriculum. What I was about to do was simply create a new curriculum for Clarissa's life. Michael, in his grief, was pliable. He just wanted his wife back, and he'd accept any help I could offer. My first move was to isolate her from her old life. "Michael, sweetie," I said in my most soothing tone, "the doctors said her brain needs to heal. We can't overwhelm her. Let's bring her to my house to recover. It's quiet here. We can control the stimulation." He agreed instantly, grateful to have a plan. I packed her things from their house, and you better believe I forgot to pack her work phone and personal laptop. Those went into a locked closet in my spare room. My second move was more audacious. I knew she couldn't just sit around my house forever. She needed a new narrative, a new purpose. And that's where the money came in. That lovely pile of Michael's money she'd been squirreling away. My original plan was just to figure out how to get it back to Michael. But then, a more creative, more poetic idea began to form. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but justice? Justice can be served warm with a side of puppies. I went online and found a website for out-of-work actors. I needed someone charming, trustworthy, and believable. I posted a casting call. Seeking a male actor, age 40 to 50, for an improvisational role. Must be excellent at conveying sincere friendship and warmth. Long-term project. The responses poured in. I interviewed a half dozen of them at a local Starbucks before I found him. David. He had kind eyes, a gentle voice, and a resume filled with theater and a few minor TV spots. Most importantly, he was a widower who was drowning in his late wife's medical bills. He needed the money, and he had the skills. I hired him on the spot. His role? To be Rick, Clarissa's long-lost best friend from before her memory gap. A friend she wouldn't remember, but whose stories would feel like whispers of her forgotten soul. And Rick was about to tell her the most wonderful things about herself. I coached David, or Rick as he was now known, for a full day before we put the plan into motion. We sat at my kitchen table with mugs of coffee and a platter of oatmeal cookies I'd baked, not out of hospitality, but because stress baking is my superpower.
"Here's the thing, David," I said, sliding a thin photo album across the table. "You can't just be a friend. You have to be her conscience. You represent the person she was before she got lost in the world of high finance and fast money." I had curated this album myself. I'd spent an entire night on social media, going back years into Clarissa's tagged photos. I found pictures of her from before she met Michael. In Nost, she had the same shark-like smile, but I found a few gems. Her, begrudgingly holding a cousin's fluffy puppy. Her, looking bored on a charity 5K run she was probably only at for networking. In the context I was building, these photos became evidence. "This one," I said, pointing to the puppy picture. "You were there that day. It was your cousin's dog. You two spent the whole afternoon trying to think of names for it. You wanted to call it General Fluffington. She thought that was ridiculous." David studied the photo, his actor's brain absorbing the details. General Fluffington. Got it. What was the dog's real name? "Doesn't matter," I said. "The point is the story, the shared experience. It has to feel real, lived in." We spent hours creating a tapestry of shared memories. A trip to a flea market where she supposedly bought a hideous ceramic cat because she felt sorry for it. A time they volunteered at a food bank during Thanksgiving, and she got into a playful argument with a grumpy old man over the last can of jellied cranberry sauce. Each story was designed to paint a portrait of a quirky, secretly soft-hearted woman who cared more about people and animals than stock options. I was basically reverse engineering a soul for her. David was an incredible study. He took notes, he asked questions. By the end of the day, he knew the fictional old Clarissa better than anyone. The introduction was scheduled for the following afternoon. I told Michael that while cleaning out a closet, I'd found one of Clarissa's old address books from before they met, and on a whim, I'd called a few numbers. I said a man named Rick had been overjoyed to hear from me, that he and Clarissa had been thick as thieves years ago, but had drifted apart. Michael, bless his trusting heart, thought it was a brilliant idea. "Oh, maybe seeing an old friend will be the key. Oh, Mom, that's wonderful." He was so desperate for a miracle, he didn't even question the ridiculous odds of it all. David arrived at my door at 2 o'clock sharp, looking exactly the part. He wore comfortable jeans, a soft flannel shirt, and a warm, genuine smile. He looked like the kind of man who knew how to change a tire and could also recommend a good book. He was holding a small bouquet of daisies. Not roses, too romantic. Daisies were friendly. Perfect. Clarissa was sitting on the sofa in my sunroom, listlessly flipping through a magazine. She looked up when we walked in, her expression guarded. Since the accident, she'd been like a startled fawn, wary of everything. "Clarissa, sweetie," I said gently, "someone's here to see you. This is your old friend, Rick." Michael beamed from a nearby armchair, his eyes shining with hope. David stepped forward, his smile gentle, not pushy. "Clar," he said, his voice filled with a perfect blend of warmth and concern. "Hey, it's me. It's Rick." She stared at him, her eyes searching his face for a flicker of recognition. Nothing. I'm sorry," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "I know," David said, and his delivery was just heartbreakingly good. He pulled up a chair so he was sitting opposite her, not towering over her. "I know. Your mom told me. I'm not here to pressure you. I heard what happened and I had to come. Had to see you were okay." Michael was practically weeping with gratitude. And so it began. For the next hour, David, as Rick, told her stories. He started slowly, painting with soft colors. He began, "You probably don't remember this, but you were the one who taught me how to skip stones at Miller's Pond. You had this crazy technique with your wrist. You could get like 7 skips. I was lucky to get 3. You were always better at the small, patient things than I was." Clarissa looked at her own wrist, as if expecting it to remember. He told her about the stray beagle. "You named him Rusty. You printed out found dog flyers at the library and put them up all over town yourself. You told me every sad creature deserves a second chance. You always said that." He glanced at me, a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He was feeding her the tagline for her new life's mission. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Oh wait, that doesn't quite fit. Let's try this one. "She was about to become the person she was always supposed to be, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere." With every story, I could see a subtle shift in Clarissa. The defensive posture of her shoulders softened. The fearful, haunted look in her eyes was replaced by a deep, aching curiosity. She wanted to be that woman, a woman who rescued dogs and was good at patient small things. It was a far better identity than the terrifying blinkness she was living with. Michael was in heaven. He kept chiming in, "Oh, honey, that sounds like you. You've always been so kind." It was the perfect reinforcement. He was an unwitting accomplice to my entire scheme. Rick visited 3 more times that week. He brought over a DVD of an old movie they had supposedly watched a dozen times together. He brought a pint of mint chocolate chip ice cream, which he claimed was her favorite. The real Clarissa wouldn't touch dairy or sugar, but this new one ate 2 bowls of it. He was slowly, painstakingly writing a new history in the empty pages of her mind. The masterstroke came on his 5th visit. He seemed a little more serious that day. "You know, Clar," he said, his voice soft, "we used to talk for hours about what we'd do if we ever got a windfall, if we suddenly had more money than we knew what to do with." Clarissa leaned forward, intrigued. "We did?" "Yeah," he said, a wistful smile on his face. "You always had the same dream. You wanted to buy a big plot of land out in the country and start a no-kill animal shelter, a place for the old dogs, the sick cats, the ones nobody else wants. You had a name for it and everything. The Second Chance Ranch." It was brilliant. A perfect confluence of all the character traits he'd been instilling in her. Her love for underdog animals, her secret kindness, her catchphrase. It landed like a lightning bolt. I saw it in her face. It felt true to her, this new her. Her eyes bubbled up with tears. "The Second Chance Ranch," she repeated, the words sounding like a prayer. "It sounds familiar." Of course it didn't, but she wanted it to. It was the first solid piece of a dream, of a purpose that she'd had since she woke up in that hospital. The next day, I made my move.
"You know, sweetie," I said to her while we were tidying the kitchen, "maybe we should get you out of the house, get some fresh air. I was thinking there's a little county animal shelter just a 20 minutes drive from here. Maybe seeing the dogs would, feel good." Clarissa's face lit up. "Yes! Could Rick come with us?" And so the three of us drove out to the bleakest, most heartbreaking animal shelter I could find online. It was a concrete block building with chain link runs. The sound of desperate barking hit you the moment you opened the car door. It smelled of bleach and sadness. It was perfect. We walked down the main kennel aisle. Dogs of every shape and size threw themselves against their cages, their eyes begging. An old three-legged black lab with a graying muzzle just lay in the corner of his run, his tail giving a single tired thump. Clarissa stopped in front of his cage. She knelt, her fingers curling through the chain link. The dog lifted its head and looked at her. "What's his name?" she whispered to a tired-looking volunteer. "That's Jet. He's been here about 6 months. He's 12. Not many people want to adopt the seniors." Clarissa's face crumpled. Rick put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He's one of the ones we talked about, Clar. The ones who need that second chance the most." That was it. The hook was set. She stood up, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes were filled with a fire I'd never seen before. It wasn't the cold, calculating fire of the old Clarissa. This was a fire of compass. She turned to me, her voice shaking but firm. "I have to do something. This is wrong. All of this is wrong." She looked around at the cramped, loud, sad facility. I feel it in my bones. The Second Chance Ranch. It wasn't just a dream. It's what I'm supposed to do. I just nodded, my face a perfect mask of loving support. Inside, I was doing a victory lap. Phase 1 was complete. The idea was no longer mine or Rick's. It was hers. Now, we just had to figure out how to pay for it with her own stolen money. The drive back from the county shelter was a study in contrasts. Clarissa was practically vibrating in the passenger seat, a woman possessed by a holy mission. She wasn't chattering aimlessly. She was thinking, her brow furrowed in concentration. For the first time since her accident, she had a future she could imagine. In the back seat, Michael was beaming, watching her with the kind of dopey, lovesick expression he usually reserved for watching old home movies of his childhood. He saw his wife alive and passionate again. And me? I was driving, my hands cool and steady on the wheel, my face a perfect picture of maternal benevolence. Inside, I was conducting a symphony. "We'll need a business plan," Clarissa said suddenly, her voice sharp and clear. "And 501c3 application. We'll need to do fundraising, a capital campaign. We'll need to project veterinary costs, food, staffing." She went on, and I almost swerved. It was the old Clarissa talking, the sharp, analytical wealth manager. The jargon, the organizational thinking, it was all there. A flicker of panic went through me. Had I reawakened the dragon?
But then she turned to Michael, her eyes shining with that new, un-Clarissa-like sincerity. "And we need a special wing just for the seniors. A quiet place with soft beds. Like for that dog, for Jet. We have to go back and get him, Michael. We can't leave him there." Michael's heart just melted into a puddle on the floor mats. "Of course, honey. Of course we can." The dragon had the same brain, but a different heart. My plan was working better than I could have ever imagined. That evening, reality began to set in. We were all sitting in my living room. I'd made pot roast for dinner, comfort food. Clarissa was on the floor with a borrowed legal pad, sketching out kennel designs. She looked up, the light in her eyes dimming slightly. "This is going to cost a fortune," she said quietly. "A big piece of land, construction, all the equipment. Where would someone even get that kind of money?" Michael looked down at his hands. He knew their finances were, his finances were a wreck. He was still paying the mortgage on that massive brownstone, plus the second mortgage she tricked him into.
He looked helpless and heartbroken, knowing he couldn't give this incredible new dream to his wife. This was my moment, the cue I had been waiting for. I let the silence hang for a moment longer, then I cleared my throat. "You know, sweetie," I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me, "when they cleared out your car after the accident, they packed up a few of your personal effects. Your laptop was in the trunk. It's a bit scratched up, but the hospital said it still works. I put it in the guest room." I paused, letting the bait dangle. I was thinking maybe looking at your old files might feel familiar. Sometimes muscle memory can kick in with passwords and things. A little spark of interest appeared in Clarissa's eyes. Her old life was a mystery to her. A laptop was a direct portal to that mystery. My laptop? "Let's go take a look," I said, getting up. We went to the guest room where I'd been keeping her. Her work phone and laptop were stashed deep in the closet, but I had brought out her sleek silver personal laptop and placed it on the desk. She sat down and lifted the screen. The login page glowed. She stared at the password field, a complete blank. "I have no idea." "Well, just try things," Michael encouraged, hovering behind her. "Your birthday? My name?" She tried them. Nothing. "The dog you had as a kid? Fluffy?" She tried that, too. Denied. She sighed, about to give up. Now for Act 2 of my little performance. "What did Rick say you two used to talk about?" I asked, pretending to rack my brain. "Something about your future? How you were planning for the future? Or wanting to be free to do what you wanted?" I was dropping breadcrumbs the size of dinner rolls. She looked at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed FREEDOM. The cursor blinked. She thought for a moment, then added 2.0. She hit enter. The screen unlocked. Michael let out a little cheer. "You did it, honey! You remembered!" Clarissa stared at the screen, her mouth slightly agape. She hadn't remembered. She'd just put the pieces together. My pieces. The desktop was pristine, organized. A few folders, photos, travel, recipes, and one icon for a secure banking app, First Sentinel Trust, an offshore bank. Very Clarissa. "What's this?" she murmured, clicking on it. It asked for another password. We went through the same charade. I helpfully suggested keywords like "my money" or "next chapter." She eventually typed in "my future," and bingo, we were in. There on the screen, in stark black and white, was the account balance. $872,451.38. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Michael gasped. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He knew they didn't have that kind of money. He certainly didn't. He looked from the screen to Clarissa and back again. Clarissa just stared. The number was so large, so abstract, it didn't seem real. "What is that?" she whispered. "Where did that come from?" I held my breath. This was the moment of truth. This was where the entire thing could collapse. Would the old Clarissa, the greedy, selfish one who had painstakingly amassed that treasure, resurface at the sight of all those zeros? Or had my new and improved version truly taken hold? Stick with me, because her next words changed everything. Michael, bless his naive soul, was the first to speak, his voice full of awe. "My God, Clarissa, this must be from all your investments. You were always talking about your portfolio, about being in the market. I had no idea you were such a genius." I jumped on that explanation like a cat on a mouse. "Of course, that's it. Clarissa, you were a financial wizard. You must have been building this nest egg for years." I framed it as a triumph of her forgotten brilliance, not a monumental betrayal. Clarissa was still trying to process it. $872,000. It was a life-changing amount of money. She could do anything with that. Buy a villa in France, disappear and start over, truly over. For a terrifying minute, I saw a flicker in her eyes, a glint of calculation that reminded me so much of the woman I'd loathed. Was she still in there? She looked at the screen, at the number, then her gaze drifted past the laptop to the legal pad on the floor, the one with her rough sketches of kennel runs. She looked at Michael, who was staring at her with such open, uncomplicated pride. And then she broke. She buried her face in her hands and started to sob. Not little, delicate tears, but deep, shoulder-shaking sobs of overwhelming emotion. Michael rushed to her, wrapping his arms around her. "It's okay, honey, it's okay," he soothed. "No, you don't understand," she choked out, looking up at him, her face a mess of tears and dawning realization. "It's not for me. Don't you see? It was never for me. This is how we do it. This is how we build the ranch." I had to physically steady myself against the doorframe, my knees weak with relief. It had worked. She looked at that pile of stolen cash and didn't see a personal jackpot. She saw a divine sign. She saw a way to fund her purpose. She saw a kennel full of old three-legged dogs. "This is our second chance," she whispered, her eyes shining with a fervor that was almost terrifying. "The money is our second chance to do something good." My son, my dear, sweet, gullible son, thought it was the most beautiful sentiment he had ever heard. He hugged her tightly, weeping with joy at her generosity, her goodness. My goodness, my generosity. I had built this woman, and she was magnificent. The anaconda had been reborn as a Saint Bernard. The next few days were a blur of activity. Clarissa, now armed with a purpose and a budget, was a force of nature. My house became her command center. We spent hours online looking at real estate listings. She wanted at least 20 acres, a mix of pasture and woods, with a decent barn they could convert. "We need legal advice, too," she declared one morning, sipping the sugary coffee she now loved. "To set up the foundation, handle the purchase of the land, all of it." Michael immediately suggested his corporate lawyer. I immediately vetoed that. No, I waved my hand dismissively. "You need someone who specializes in nonprofits, someone with a little more heart." I already had someone in mind, Arthur Pence. A friend of my late husband's. He was a semi-retired estate lawyer, sharp as a tack, but with the demeanor of a sleepy bloodhound. More importantly, he was loyal to me and knew when to keep his mouth shut. I told them Arthur was the best in the state for charitable foundations. I called Arthur ahead of time. "Arthur, I have a bit of a delicate family matter," and I proceeded to give him the highly edited version of events. I told him my daughter-in-law had suffered a memory loss and had a wonderful philanthropic awakening. She had her own substantial funds from savvy investments that she wanted to use to start an animal shelter, and we needed to make sure it was all done above board to protect her and my son. Arthur, who had seen his share of bizarre family dynamics over 40 years, just grunted. "So you need me to set up a 501c3 and handle a real estate transaction and keep things straightforward? Is that the gist of it, Eleanor?" "That's the gist of it, Arthur. Straightforward as can be." He agreed to meet with us. The pieces were moving into place. The money was secured, the mission was defined, the legal muscle was lined up. All we needed now was the land. And that Friday, Clarissa found it. An old dairy farm that had been on the market for 6 months. 40 acres of rolling green hills, a sturdy old farmhouse, and a massive red barn that was perfect for conversion. It was an hour outside the city. It was perfect. "This is it," she breathed, staring at the pictures online. "This is the place." We made an appointment to see it the very next day. Michael, Clarissa, Rick, who had to come along as his moral support and a link to her past,
and me. As we got ready to leave, a thought crossed my mind. What if something on that farm, a smell, a sight, a sound, jogged her real memory? What if the house of cards I had so painstakingly built came tumbling down? It was a risk, but it was one I had to take. The farm was even better in person. The air smelled of hay and damp earth, a scent so wholesome it felt like a cleanser. The farmhouse was a little run down, paint peeling from the clapboard siding, but it had a wide, welcoming porch and big windows that looked out over the fields. Clarissa stepped out of the car and just stood there, breathing it all in. I could practically see her planting roots into the soil. "It's quiet," she said, her voice full of wonder. It was a stark contrast to the relentless hum of the sea she once thrived in. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the leaves of a massive oak tree and the distant cawing of a crow. The real estate agent, a brisk woman named Brenda, with an overly firm handshake, launched into her sales pitch about zoning and acreage and well water, but Clarissa wasn't really listening. She had walked over to the big red barn, Michael trailing her like a loyal puppy. Rick and I hung back, observing. I heard her say, "Rick, you're right. This is the dream. This is what I was meant to do." Rick, or David, I should say, gave a performance worthy of a daytime Emmy. He put his hand on his heart and looked up at the sky. She would have loved this, Clar, my Martha. She always said your passion for helping the helpless was the best thing about you. He'd woven his late wife Martha into their shared backstory, a brilliant touch. It gave his character depth and an added layer of unimpeachable sincerity. Clarissa gave his hand a squeeze. "I'm glad I have you here to help me remember."
"Always," he said. And I knew then that David was earning every single penny of the handsome fee I was paying him. They spent the next hour walking the property. Michael, with his architect's eye, was already talking about structural supports for the barn and where they could build the veterinary clinic. Clarissa was mapping out dog runs in the air with her hands, her face alight with the kind of joy I had never, ever seen on her before. The old Clarissa's idea of a good time was a hostile takeover or finding a loophole in the tax code. This Clarissa was happy about the quality of the mud. It was a definite upgrade. By the time we got back in the car, the decision was made. She wanted it. She turned to me from the passenger seat, her eyes serious. "You said your friend Arthur could help with the legal side of things?" "Absolutely," I said. "I'll set up a meeting for Monday morning." And I did. On Monday, we all trooped into Arthur's dusty, book-lined office. Arthur Pence looked exactly like his name sounded, old-fashioned, a bit stout, and utterly serious. He peered over Clarissa over his half-moon spectacles as I introduced them. "So," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you want to buy a farm and turn it into a home for mongrels." He had a way with words. Clarissa wasn't deterred. For the next 30 minutes, she laid out her vision. She didn't just talk about fluffy bunnies and cute puppies. She talked with the crisp efficiency of the wealth manager she'd once been. She'd already researched county regulations, cost per animal averages, and grant opportunities for animal welfare organizations. She had a list of potential veterinary suppliers and a 3-phase plan for development. She was incredible. All that ruthless type A energy now harnessed for good. She was going to run the most fiscally responsible, emotionally nurturing animal shelter in the history of the world. Arthur was visibly impressed. The sleepy bloodhound was starting to wake up. "The funding," he said, getting to the heart of the matter. "Your mother-in-law mentioned you have significant personal assets. You're planning to use those to fund this endeavor?" "All of them," Clarissa said without a moment's hesitation. Arthur leaned back in his creaky leather chair. "We'll need to transfer those funds from their current location, an offshore trust in the Cayman Islands." He looked at her pointedly. "First Sentinel Trust. Any particular reason you chose an offshore institution? They can be complicated." My heart did a little flip-flop. This was a direct question about her past. Clarissa's brow furrowed. I saw the familiar look of confusion, the slight panic that came whenever she bumped up against the wall of her missing memories. I don't recall, she said, her voice small. I suppose I had my reasons. I jumped in smoothly. Clarissa's financial work was very high level, Arthur. I'm sure it had to do with tax advantages for her clients or some such thing. The important thing is she wants to bring it all home now for the shelter. Arthur nodded slowly, his eyes still on Clarissa. Very well, Miss Vance. I will contact the bank this afternoon. The international transfer could take a few business days. In the meantime, we can drop an offer on the farm, contingent on financing. We left his office and stepped out into the sunshine. Clarissa felt like a new woman. The money, which had been the strange, abstract thing on a computer screen, was finally being put to work. It was becoming real. She was becoming real. That evening, the first crack appeared in my perfect facade. It was just after dinner. Michael was out picking up a prescription, and Clarissa was on the phone with a contractor, peppering him with questions about insulation for the barn. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, feeling deeply satisfied with myself. Justice was being done. My son would ultimately get his money back in the form of a shared tax-deductible dream, and a lot of sad animals would get a happy home. Everybody wins. The phone rang. My phone. I glanced at the caller ID. Unknown name, unknown number. I usually ignore those, but for some reason, I answered it. Hello?
A man's voice, smooth and sharp-edged like broken glass. Am I speaking with Eleanor Gable? Yes, who is this? My name is Julian Croft. I am, or I was, Clarissa Vance's attorney. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The divorce attorney. The one from the emails. Oh, God. Oh, no. I am calling as a courtesy, he said, his voice cold and precise. For the past 2 months, I have sent multiple invoices to Ms. Vance for my retainer and preliminary services. They have gone unanswered. I have also left several messages which have not been returned. Before I proceed with filing a formal action, I was hoping a family member could shed some light on the situation. Is Ms. Vance available? I leaned against the counter, my knuckles white where I gripped the edge. My mind raced. This man was a loose thread. No, he was a bomb. He knew everything. He knew about the plan, the secret account, the impending divorce. If he spoke to Clarissa... I'm afraid she isn't, I said, my voice remarkably steady. Clarissa was in a very serious car accident 8 weeks ago. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Is that so? My condolences. Is she recovering? She is, but there were complications. She suffered a traumatic brain injury. She has severe amnesia. Another pause, this one longer. I could almost hear the gears turning in his expensive lawyer brain. Amnesia, he repeated. It wasn't a question, it was a calculation. I see. Well, that is certainly an unexpected development. He didn't sound concerned, he sounded intrigued. I believe I still need to speak with her or her legal guardian regarding her outstanding financial obligations to my firm. Just then, Clarissa walked into the kitchen, having finished her call. She smiled at me, a real warm smile. The contractor is drawing up a quote for the HVAC system, she said cheerfully. I turned my back to her, lowering my voice. Now it's not a good time. Her recovery is very delicate. I'm sure is, Julian Croft said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. Let me be frank, Mrs. Gable. My client and I had a very specific, very confidential plan in motion. A plan that involves a significant amount of capital that she was to secure. Her sudden amnesia is conveniently timed. Perhaps you and I should have a little chat in person. The friendly mask was off. This was a threat.
He knew where the money was, and he clearly intended to get his piece of it, one way or another. I don't know what you're talking about, I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. Oh, I think you do, he purred. I think you know about everything, including the spring cleaning file. How about I stop by tomorrow around 3? I'm sure we'll have so much to talk about. And he hung up, leaving me standing in my sunny, perfect kitchen with the cold dread of total catastrophe seeping into my bones. The dragon wasn't just dormant, it had a lawyer, and he was coming to my door tomorrow. The click of the disconnected line echoed in the sudden silence of my kitchen. Clarissa was humming, sorting through paint swatches she'd picked up at the hardware store, debating shades of white for the clinic, cloud white or simply white. She was agonizing over the subtle differences. I was agonizing over the very unsubtle threat of a man who could burn my entire creation to the ground. My first impulse was pure animal panic. I wanted to grab my son and Clarissa, bundle them into my Subaru, and just drive north until the cell service gave out and Julian Croft couldn't find us. But I am not a runner. I was a principal at a tough high school for 22 years. I've stared down angry parents, defiant teenagers, and even a school board threatening to cut the arts program. I do not run. I strategize. Clarissa looked up, her brow crinkling in concern. Are you okay, Eleanor? You look like you've seen a ghost. I forced a smile, the muscles in my face feeling stiff and unfamiliar. Just a telemarketer, sweetie. Terribly persistent. It's given me a bit of a headache, that's all. I needed to get them out of the house tomorrow. Not just out, but far away and occupied for the entire afternoon. You know what? I said, an idea sparking in the fog of my fear. Brenda, the real estate agent, mentioned that the owners of the farm left behind a lot of old equipment in one of the sheds. Tack, feeders, things like that. She said we were welcome to look through it before the sale is final. Why don't you and Michael drive out there tomorrow? Take the whole day. Pack a lunch. You could start making an inventory of what's usable for the shelter. It was the perfect bait, a practical, mission-oriented task. Clarissa's eyes lit up. That's a brilliant idea. We can measure the stalls in the barn again. I want to see if we can fit radiant heating in the floors for the older dogs. Excellent. My little St. Bernard was on the case. With her and Michael safely dispatched to the countryside, I could prepare for war. After they went to bed, I turned my placid, grandmotherly kitchen into a command center. I poured a glass of Riesling, not for pleasure, but for fuel, and sat down at my laptop. Julian Croft, Esquire. It was time to find out who he really was. It turns out that even slick, confidential lawyers have a digital footprint. His firm's website was as smug as his voice, all steel and glass, with a photo of him leaning against a massive desk, looking out over a city skyline. He specialized in discrete asset division for high-net-worth individuals, a fancy way of saying he helped rich people screw over their spouses. There were testimonials, of course, all gushing about his ruthless efficiency and unparalleled strategic mind.
But then I started digging deeper. Not the first page of Google results, but the 5th, the 10th. I searched his name along with words like complaint, lawsuit, and review. And I found it. A series of scathing reviews on a lesser-known legal forum, all from anonymous posters, but all telling a similar story. Tales of exorbitant billing, of adding charges for phone calls that never happened, of squeezing every last drop of blood from his clients' retainers. He was a financial predator. This wasn't a smoking gun, legally, but it was a character reference. Then came the jackpot. A small article in a local business journal from 3 years ago. It detailed the messy, acrimonious breakup of his previous law firm, Croft and Meyer. His former partner, a man named Robert Meyer, was quoted as saying, "Julian has a different philosophy of client management than I do. I believe in transparency. His belief is in the invoice." The article hinted that the split was over allegations of fraudulent billing.
The allegations were never proven, but the stink of them was still there, clinging to the digital ether. I printed out the article and the reviews. I now had my ammunition. It wasn't enough to destroy him, but it was certainly enough to embarrass him. And for a man with an ego the size of a downtown skyscraper, embarrassment might be just as effective. The next morning, I called my secret weapon, David. "I have a problem," I said, and quickly explained about Julian Croft. To his credit, he didn't panic. The man was a professional. "What's your play?" he asked, his voice calm. "My play is that he's coming here at 3. Clarissa and Michael will be gone. I'm going to handle it." "Do you want me there?" David asked. "I can be Rick, show up unexpectedly, back you up." I considered it. It was tempting, but it was too risky. "No, I need you to be my alibi. I need you to call Clarissa's cell phone at exactly 3:15 this afternoon. You're Rick, remember? You've just heard about a silent auction for veterinary equipment from a clinic that's closing down. You need her advice urgently. Keep her on the phone for at least half an hour. I don't want her even thinking about packing up early and coming home." "Consider it done," he said. "Be careful, Eleanor. Sharks can smell blood in the water." "Oh, I know," I said, looking at the printouts on my counter, "but I'm not bleeding. I'm laying a trap." At 1 o'clock, I sent Michael and Clarissa off with a wicker picnic basket full of chicken salad sandwiches and a thermos of iced tea. They were like 2 kids heading off to summer camp, excited and full of purpose. The moment their car was out of sight, my performance as the gentle matriarch ended. I was now Eleanor Gable, principal, retired, preparing for the most high-stakes parent-teacher conference of my life. I know what you're thinking. How on earth was a retired principal in a cardigan going to take on a high-powered shark in a $1,000 suit? Well, never underestimate a woman with a good internet connection and nothing left to lose. Stay tuned. I set the stage carefully. I put a kettle on for tea, I put out my best china cups and a plate of the oatmeal cookies I'd made earlier. The scene was meant to scream harmless, doting grandmother. On the coffee table, next to the teacups, I placed a framed photo of Michael and Clarissa, taken a few weeks ago at the park. They were laughing, and she had a smear of ice cream on her nose. Underneath it, almost hidden, I tucked the file folder with my printouts. At 1 o'clock, on the dot, the doorbell rang. I opened it to see Julian Croft in the flesh. He was exactly as I'd pictured him. Expensive suit, perfect hair, shoes so shiny they reflected the clouds. He had a lizard's smile and cold, watchful eyes. Mrs. Gable, he said, extending a hand. His handshake was like his real estate agent's, firm and claiming dominance. "Thank you for seeing me." "Mr. Croft, please, come in. Can I get you some tea?" I asked, my voice the auditory equivalent of a soft focus lens. "No, thank you." He strode into my living room like he owned it. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries. Where is my client?" I sat down in my favorite armchair and gestured for him to take the sofa. He remained standing, a power move. I just smiled placidly. As I said, she's recovering. Her doctors have advised a quiet, stress-free environment. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. Her environment is about to get very stressful. She has or had a contract with me, a contract that entitled me to a percentage of the assets recovered in her divorce settlement. Those assets, I now find, are being moved out of an account I helped her establish. "I'm afraid I don't know anything about a divorce," I said, feigning confusion. "My son and his wife are very happy. They're buying a farm, actually, to start an animal sanctuary." That made him stop. "A what?" "An animal sanctuary," I repeated pleasantly. "They're pouring all of Clarissa's savings into it. It's been her lifelong dream. The money transfer is already in progress. You see, Arthur Pence is handling it. I'm sure you've heard of him. A very well-respected man."
I watched his face as he processed this.
I had just told him that the giant pile of money he was planning to feast on was being legally funneled into a tax-deductible charity. His commission was turning into dog food and vet bills right before his eyes. The coldness in his eyes turned into hot fury. "That is absurd," he hissed. "That money is marital property siphoned off illegally. I advised her on the entire scheme. We were days away from filing when she had her accident." He said the word like it was a lie I'd personally invented. "This amnesia story is cute, but it won't hold up. The moment I speak to her, the moment I remind her of who she really is and what she was doing, you'll do no such thing," I said. My voice was still soft, but the gentle fog had burned off. Now it was just quiet, clear, and cold. "You will not go anywhere near her. You will not disrupt her recovery. She has been through a terrible trauma." He took a step toward me. "And you will not steal my fee. That's over $87,000. I will sue her. I will sue you. I will sue the aphasic dog she plans to adopt. I will put a lien on every last cent in that account." I just looked at him. I let him finish his tantrum. When he was done, breathing heavily, I leaned forward and picked up the folder on the coffee table. "Mr. Croft," I began, my tone now shifting to one of academic inquiry. "While preparing for your visit, I did a little research into your professional history. I'm a retired educator, you see. Old habits die hard, and I found a few things that concerned me." I slid the first printout about the blistering reviews across the table toward him. "These former clients seem to have had a rather uniform experience with your billing practices." His eyes flickered to the paper. His reptilian smile tightened. I slid the second printout on top of it, the article about his old law firm. "A different philosophy of client management. That's a very diplomatic way of putting it, isn't it?" He stared at the papers. He knew exactly what they were. He knew they weren't enough to disbar him, but he also knew they were a direct hit on his reputation, his most valuable asset. "And here's my concern, Mr. Croft." I leaned back in my chair. "If you were to file a lawsuit, that would lead to a discovery process, wouldn't it? Depositions. All of Clarissa's financial records, including your own invoices to her, would become a matter of public record. A good lawyer, and I assure you, Arthur Pence is a very good lawyer, might take a keen interest in your billing history. He might even feel compelled to share these documents with the State Bar Association. Not as a threat, of course, simply as a matter of due diligence to protect his new client, who happens to be your old one." I let that sink in. I had just turned his weapon against him. He wanted to use the law to get to the money. I was showing him how the law could get to him. I picked up my teacup. The silence in the room was absolute. I could see the wheels turning behind his cold eyes. He was reevaluating. He had walked in here expecting a scared old woman. He had found a chess player. Finally, he spoke, his voice stripped of all its earlier bravado. "What do you want?" I took a sip of tea. I am a pragmatist. I know you won't do that for free. I reached into the folder one last time and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a blank check, drawn not from my account or Michael's, but a new temporary holding account Arthur had set up, titled the Second Chance Ranch Foundation Preliminary Account. You did provide a service for Clarissa, and you sent invoices. I believe the total was $8,000 for your retainer. The actual number was closer to 20, but I was lowballing him. Write it out for the $8,000. Consider it a final consultation fee. In return, you will sign a document Arthur has already prepared, releasing Clarissa from any further obligation and affirming that your professional relationship is terminated. We'll wire the funds by 5 o'clock. He looked at the check, then at me. 8,000 was an insult compared to the 87 he thought he was getting, but 87,000 came with a public court case, a professional inquiry from the bar, and a world of trouble. 8,000 was quiet. It was now. He stared at me for a long, hard moment. Then slowly, he picked up the pen from my coffee table. A flicker of something that might have been respect, or maybe just pure, unadulterated hatred passed through his eyes. He had been completely and totally outplayed. The shark had been declawed by a grandmother in a cardigan. Julian Croft scribbled his name on the release form with a vicious slash of the pen, as if he were trying to murder the paper itself. He filled out the check, folded it precisely, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his suit jacket without another word. The swagger was gone. His shoulders, which had been squared and arrogant when he walked in, were now slumped in defeat.
He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. He turned and looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than greed in his eyes. It was a cold, clinical curiosity. "You're a real piece of work, Eleanor Gable," he said, his voice a low hiss. "A sweet old lady baking cookies and orchestrating this. You know, in my line of work, I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong." I gave him a serene little smile. "We all have our hidden talents, Mr. Croft. Mine just happens to be curriculum development. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a pot roast to check on." He stared at me for a second longer, then shook his head and walked out of my house and out of our lives. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 24 hours. My hands were trembling slightly, so I wrapped them around my now cold cup of tea. I wasn't a principal anymore, but I felt like I had just successfully expelled the biggest bully in the school. The rest of the plan fell into place like a row of perfectly aligned dominoes. Arthur called the next morning to confirm that Mr. Croft's signed release had been couriered to his office and the $8,000 had been wired and accepted. The final tie to Clarissa's old, venomous life was officially severed. 3 days later, the bulk of the funds, $864,451.38 to be exact, landed in the Second Chance Ranch Foundation's new, fully domestic bank account. Clarissa and Michael signed the papers for the farm the following week. It was time to handle my last loose end, David. I met him at the same Starbucks where I had hired him. It felt fitting. I slid a thick envelope across the table to him. It contained the final payment for his services, plus a significant bonus for outstanding performance in a challenging role, I told him. He looked at the envelope, then at me. You looked at me, then at me. How did it all turn out with the lawyer? I told him everything. He listened intently, a small smile playing on his lips. "So you really did it. You saved your son and built a whole new person." "We did it," I corrected him. "Rick was the key. You were brilliant, David." He looked down at his coffee, a flicker of something almost sad in his kind eyes. "You know, it's funny. I've played hundreds of parts in my career, but Rick, he's the one I think I'm going to miss the most. It felt good telling those stories. It felt like we were building something decent." "We were," I assured him. "And now it's built." We had already crafted his exit strategy. His character, Rick, was going to move to Arizona to take care of his aging, unseen mother. It was a clean, noble reason to leave, one that Clarissa would accept without suspicion. Their farewell was genuinely emotional. Clarissa cried and hugged him, making him promise to write. "Thank you, Rick," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Thank you for helping me find myself again." The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of construction and creation. The big red barn was transformed. Insulated stuff with heated floors went in, along with a state-of-the-art veterinary clinic and spacious sun-filled catteries. Michael's architectural skills were on full display. He designed everything, making it both beautiful and functional.
Clarissa was the project manager, the fundraiser, the heart and soul of the whole operation. She was on site from dawn to dusk, a smudge of dirt perpetually on her cheek, her fancy corporate manicure a distant memory, replaced by capable hands that knew how to soothe a nervous dog. She was happy. Truly, deeply, authentically happy in a way the old Clarissa, with all her money and schemes, could never have comprehended. They held their grand opening in early summer. The whole community came. I stood at the back of the crowd, watching. The sign over the barn door, beautifully carved from a piece of oak from their own land, read, "The Second Chance Ranch." Clarissa got up to give a speech. She looked radiant, dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She spoke about the mission, about second chances for animals that society had thrown away. Then she looked over at Michael, who was watching her with unabashed adoration. "And second chances for people, too," she said, her voice catching. "After my accident, I felt like a ghost. I didn't know who I was. But with the love of my incredible husband and my amazing mother-in-law, Eleanor," she smiled directly at me, and the warmth of it was so genuine it almost buckled my knees. "I got the chance to build a new life, to become the person I was always meant to be." The crowd applauded. I just nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I had done it. My revenge wasn't a punishment. It was a resurrection. The old Clarissa was dead and buried, not in a grave, but in the blank spaces of her own mind. In her place stood this woman, this kind, passionate, wonderful stranger who loved my son and saved animals. The very first resident of the ranch was, of course, Jet, the old three-legged black lab from the county shelter. I went to visit a few weeks after they opened. I found Clarissa sitting on the floor of a sunny quarantine pen, her arm around Jet, who was leaning his full weight against her, his eyes closed in contentment. She looked up at me and smiled. "You know," she said, stroking his graying head, "sometimes I get these flashes. It's like a dream I can't quite remember, of a different life, a different me." My heart stopped. "Oh," I said, keeping my voice light. "What's she like, this other you?"
She paused, thinking. "She's shiny," she said finally, "and hard, like glass. And she's lonely. So incredibly lonely." She shook her head, as if to clear a bad dream, and then looked down at the old dog sleeping against her. "I feel so sorry for her. Whoever she was, she didn't have this." She scratched Jet behind the ears, and his one good back leg started to thump against the floor. I looked at the scene, my daughter-in-law, who had tried to ruin my son, now dedicating her life and her stolen money to the comfort of a crippled old dog. Justice, as it turns out, isn't always about vengeance. Sometimes it's about rewriting the story from the beginning and giving it a much, much better ending. I had wronged a woman, no doubt about it. I had played God with her mind and her life, but I had also saved my son, created a haven for hundreds of creatures, and in the process, I'd turned a monster into a pretty decent human being. So that's my story. It's a lot, I know. Now I have to ask you the question I've asked myself 100 times. What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Bye bye!